Okay, so if I was designing a mango, like a perfect mango, and there is no such thing, of course, but like, well, I would say first and foremost, I want it to taste incredible. So it's got to be like a 6 out of 5 or whatever. It's got to be a mind blowing mango year after year after year. Um, and it would probably would want it to be a unique flavor. So in the citrus or coconut realm, although there's mangoes with classic flavor that I adore, like Dot and Phoenix. And there's into Chinese flavored mangoes like Sweet Tart and Ceci Love. My favorite mango is Sweet Tart. I imagine that, in fact, let's go with Sweet Tart. So let's take Sweet Tart, which is my personal favorite mango. What could I do to improve upon a mango that I already think tastes amazing? Well, I would make the tree smaller. I would make the fruit, or I would make the tree more likely to flower, and I'd make the fruit larger. So, Sweet Tart is a smaller mango. I'd like to make the fruit more medium size. For most people who buy mangoes, if they're not really into mangoes already, they'll gravitate towards fruit, we've observed, that are in the, we'll say, the 3/4 of a pound to pound and a half range. If they're smaller than that, people tend to ignore them. And if they're larger than that, people get sticker shock because they're sold by the pound. So a mango that averages about a pound to a pound and a half in weight is really optimal. So if I could take that Sweet Tart, turn it into a mango that size, and give it some better color, um, so like red and orange blush colors really attract people's attention. It's not as critical a factor when you're selling them locally, but as the scale grows, appearance matters quite a bit. So, and we want a fruit that's not going to split as easily when there's rainfall occurring during the summer. So, structural integrity is important. So those are a few factors that would come to mind in terms of designing an ideal mango. Taking something that already tastes great and making it a little better, improving upon it. So there's certainly a lot, we can say that about almost every mango. For example, if I was going to try to improve the Edward, I would make the tree smaller. I would probably make it a little more resistant to anthracnose, um, and you know, well, those are a few things that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of trying to improve this variety. So we can identify these traits with almost every mango. There's very few that there's not a lot we can do to improve upon them. Um, Close to it is something like a Pickering or an Angie. I would say we can probably still improve the flavor of those varieties a bit, but the performance of the trees is really hard to argue with. Um, and the other traits that those varieties have are pretty strong too. And I could probably think of some other varieties that it would be difficult for us to improve upon. But almost any kind of mango, you can find traits that can be made a little better with experimentation, I suppose.
All right, so some quick questions. So, which mango, in your opinion, would have the perfect color? Like if Sweet Tart could have the color of those red and orange blushes, what
Probably
mango already has that you
perfect
say?
color. Yeah.
Yeah.
A few that come to mind are Ah Ping, Irwin has absolutely gorgeous color. Um, what else would be a real pretty one? Some of the Israeli ones like Mag Shanin and uh,
I like the Hayden locally. Is
Hayden is
good
a pretty
color.
mango for sure. Kind of anthracnose prone, of course, but I mean, so are some of these other ones I'm discussing. Yeah, Hayden gets nice color. Winters is a beautiful mango, gets wonderful color. Zill 80 is very pretty. So those are a few. It's a much longer list than that, of course. Spirit of 76, I'm just looking at a Spirit of 76 tree right now. That's an absolutely gorgeous mango. So there's a few right there. Um,
In terms of size, which one would have the perfect size and shape? Like, would you make it boxy, kind of like a Julie, long like a Mahashanook, more rounded mango,
I
more
would say
oval?
probably an oval to ovate shape is probably the best um, in terms of how they pack and how they look, appear. Size, it's going to be like around a pound in weight. So, uh, and beyond that, preferably not too many blemishes, um, skin fissures, you don't want mottling, which can happen with certain varieties, like Malika and Lemon Zest can get mottling on the skin, which kind of looks unattractive. And there's a few other mangoes which that can occur with. So,
In terms of flesh color, would it matter to you? Would you prefer a deeper orangey color or more yellow or
yeah,
pale?
definitely a darker orange appeals to more people. And pale color is not as desirable. So you want at least a dark yellow to orange color if you can control for that. How important is that as a factor? Probably not very high, but we're talking about, ideals here. So, yeah.
Flesh to seed ratio, which mangoes do you think have the best flesh to seed ratio?
And Maha Shinnok has a very good flesh to seed ratio because it's got such a thin seed. Namdok Maya is that way too. So there's a number of Thai varieties that have really good flesh to seed ratio, but there's non-Thai varieties and some of the classic ones that have very good flesh to seed ratios, like Ah Peng, for example, has a pretty thin seed. What else? Awais has a very thin seed. That's an Egyptian mango. That's long. That's just...
In terms of disease resistance, you would want it to have the disease resistance of what kind of cultivars that we have already, or productivity of what cultivars?
Some really disease-resistant varieties are Duncan, which is this mango right here. That's an exceptionally disease-resistant mango because it's resistant to anthracnose. It's resistant to powdery mildew enough to set through it. Any mango can get powdery mildew, but the question is whether they can set through the powdery mildew. And it's resistant to mango bacterial black spot. Boom. 3 important diseases for us that we don't really have to worry about with that variety. And that doesn't mean that any mango, even the most disease-resistant mango, wouldn't benefit from some additional disease control and prevention, but that's a great example. Floragon has outstanding disease resistance. Angie has terrific disease resistance. Pickering is one of the most disease-resistant mangoes we grow. So those are a few with really great resistance to powdery mildew, anthracnose, and bacterial black spot. And there's a few others too, for sure. Some of which, maybe they're super disease resistant, but not super popular, like Philippine, for example. So if we're selecting varieties for disease resistance, we probably also need to try to find the best tasting already of those varieties. Like another really disease resistant one that tastes great is Cecilove. Cecilove is resistant seemingly to everything in the book, and it already tastes awesome. It's just maybe not the most photogenic mango because it doesn't really get any red color or orange blush. So,
you mentioned tree size being important. What trees already possess that quality that you would want in your perfect mango?
Pickering for sure. Very stout, low-growing dwarfish tree. Julie. What else? There is the Honeykiss. It's pretty small, nice small tree. There's one that we grow called Saigon, the original Saigon, as they call it. David Fairchild Saigon. That's been very dwarf for us. And I mean, they don't even need to be dwarf necessarily, because even some of the small trees you can realistically keep at or under 10 feet in height spread with some pruning and not overfeeding them. But I think kind of the smaller you start with, probably the more opportunity you have to breed hybrids that are not too aggressive. So,
do you have a preference for the type of canopy, whether like open or compact?
I would say open is more optimal because it allows for more light penetration and airflow. So if we're going to choose one or the other, it would be open. But the issue with open canopy mangoes is sometimes they're also kind of naturally lanky. So like Pickering has a dense canopy, which wouldn't necessarily be desirable, but it seems to work out okay for the tree. So open if you can, but most of the open canopy mangoes, in my experience, are at least moderately vigorous to vigorous. So, and a few examples of that would be Kit, Opping, moderate to vigorous trees for sure. What are some other open canopy mangoes? Well, those are just a few that came to mind. Can't think of any other off the top of my head at the moment. But.
All right. Preference, you said it's important to have early or late season. Between the two, which would you choose?
Between the two, I would choose early because people are very excited about mangoes in the early part of the season, and it's, for the grower, it's very easy to sell them, and for the consumer or the backyard producer, your trees and your fruit are less exposed to the severe thunderstorms and the Atlantic hurricane season as well. So, fruit that's maturing between March and June, that fruit is probably going to be uh, experiencing a lot less rainfall and wind and so forth that can cause problems in terms of disease, in terms of fruit loss. So whereas the stuff that's maturing in August or September is right in prime hurricane season, thunderstorm season, whatever, and getting exposed to disease pathogens for a longer period of time. That's not to say there's no value in late season mangoes. There absolutely is. But if we're having to choose between two options, the optimal one, I suppose, or the more valuable one at the moment would probably be something that's going to mature in the spring.
How about for reliability of production and fruit set and flowering and those kind of traits?
Right. Well, there's not too many mangoes that flower more reliably than Edward or Julie. Those two flower very regularly. Dwarf Hawaiian flowers very regularly and fruits very regularly for us. What else flowers pretty easily? Certainly some of the ones that we've planted a lot of, like Pickering and Angie, flower pretty well and easily. Not quite as easily as these guys do. These will flower off of a 2-day cold front. Rosy Gold flowers exceptionally easily. Talking about a mango that fruits very easily and also has good color. Rosy Gold has really nice physical appearance too. So I can't leave out Rosy Gold there. That's a very reliable bloomer and fruiter for sure. That would be one that I would want to work with in a breeding program, I think, in addition to the Edward.
Yeah. So did we leave anything out? Your perfect mango then would be something similar to a sweet tart, but larger, but a more compact tree, preferably open canopy.
Yeah, more colorful, I suppose. And there's other things that I could grab in terms of, desirable traits that we could tack on there.
What about smell? Like I happen
Aroma,
to,
yeah.
the smell of Hayden just is vacation to me.
Okay, so some people, a classic aroma is very appealing, and I think it's what a lot of people associate with mangoes. Aroma is a great thing, as long as it's not so pungent as to overwhelm people's palates, and there are some mangoes that can do that. Like the Saint alone has a very strong smell. And the Bangin' Polly does too. It can fill a room. And then there's things like some of the mango relative species, like Mangifera odorata, will make your whole house smell. So there's limits. You want it to smell nice though, and certainly classically flavored mangoes have a pretty appealing smell and aroma. So do in my opinion, some of the Indo-Chinese hybrids have a pretty nice smell to them too. Some of the more aromatic mangoes tend to be some of the Indian varieties. So I think the Indian, West Indian type smell is pretty pungent, and but in an attractive kind of way. So the citrus ones have a really nice aroma, but like it's not so powerful necessarily that it's going to fill a room or something like that.
Texture of the flesh. Like I've had some mangoes that are jelly-like. Some obviously has some fiber.
That's a good one that I didn't talk about earlier. Texture. So certainly we want it to be fiberless, or close to fiberless. How we define fiberless can be tricky because they can have a little bit of fiber, and it's not objectionable to most people. But some people, they want something that's going to be essentially Freest Stone. So I would say that we want the mango to have firm flesh so that it doesn't bruise easily, but it's still fiberless or pretty close to fiberless. And that can be difficult and tricky to achieve. Edward is a relatively firm fleshed mango that's not fibrous. It's basically fiber free. And there's certainly other examples like Kent. Kent is a relatively firm fleshed mango, old variety, but it still holds up well in terms of its texture. So then there's mangoes that are way too soft, like the Kerry is the classic example of that, but there's certainly plenty of others that are just too soft, and we wish we could make them a little more firm without adding fiber to them. But a mango can be fibrous and soft too, or at least moderately fibrous and soft. A mango like Springfells, for example, has a little bit of fiber, nothing absurd, but a very soft flesh that bruises very easily. So,
Shelf life, how important would that be, and what mangoes
yeah,
already have a good shelf life?
that matters too. We don't like it when a mango that we just picked is already overripe less than 48 hours later. And that
Julie kind of
happens.
does that
Julie
sometimes.
does that. It's notorious for a poor shelf life. One of my favorite mangoes, Dot, has a really poor shelf life, I have to confess. Other examples of mangoes with rather brief shelf lives, Spirit of 76, Bailey's Marvel, terrific mango, but pretty short shelf life. Coconut Cream's shelf life isn't terrific. But there are mangoes with, on the other end of the spectrum, very long shelf lives. Pickering, Angie's really good. Southern Blush has a long shelf life. Sweet Tart has a very good shelf life. So, does it matter? Yes, it matters more so for producers that are selling their product, but it matters for homeowners too, because you want to be able to share your fruit with your family, with your friends, whatever. And if the mango's going overripe a little too quickly, then it's not as fun. So I would say aim for a shelf life where there's a window period of at least 3 days where the mango can be consumed without taking on off flavors. And there's some mangoes that can go well at least a little bit beyond that amount of time. But there's plenty like Kerry, for example, that you can't hold on to for that long before those off flavors start showing up. So shelf life matters, and it's not at the top of the list in terms of the kind of mangoes that we're discussing for like local production and local consumption and backyard growing, but it is a factor on there, probably above actually appearance of the fruit for what the purposes of this discussion.
Characteristics like Freest Stone would probably be low in the priority, but
It
what are
would
some
be.
good Freest Stone?
Bombay is a terrific Freest Stone variety. When we say Freest Stone, we're talking about a mango where the flesh does not adhere to the seed. There's no seed fiber. So Bombay is one. There's one that we call the USDA Tamor that is Freest Stone. Coggeshall, very common variety, is Freest Stone too. Pretty much Freest Stone. Floragon's Freest Stone as well. Uh, let's see. There's a much longer list than that. How important is it? Not very. It's kind of neat to be able to like have a mango and twist it apart, which the Freest Stone ones, that's pretty easy to do. And you can kind of carve it up a little easier because you can take all the flesh off the seed very easily. But it's not a high priority on the list of stuff that we're looking for in terms of traits.
All right, did we leave anything out?
I'm sure we did because there's so many little things. There's definitely stuff we left out, but I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.